Hello, I'm Roz Rothstein, CEO of Stand With Us, and this is StandWithUsConnect. Welcome. We're so happy you could join us today, and we hope you're doing well during these very challenging times. We have another great show for you today. Today we have the CEO and President of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, Yael Eckstein. We're so excited to have her with us. Such a significant organization. If you want to check out other Stand With Us TV shows, you could go to StandWithUs.tv, register just one time, and you'll be able to scroll and see which shows are of interest for you, including things like answering difficult questions about Israel, all kinds of topics about anti-Semitism. We're very excited to be able to offer this new platform to you now. Today's show is streaming across Stand With Us digital platforms, and it's never, ever been easier to get involved. So please do. You can post a comment. We'll see it across the screen, or you can ask a question, and we will try to get through as many questions as we can during the time that we have today. So we look forward to the show, and we're about to bring on our guest, Yael Eckstein. Don't forget, if you love the work of Stand With Us, and it's critical these days with rising anti-Semitism and the need to educate the next generation for Israel and the Jewish people and peace, please support the work of Stand With Us. Go to standwithus.com/donate, and we are appreciative in advance for your support. Thank you so much. And now, let's introduce our guest, Yael Eckstein. We're so happy to have you with us today. Yael is the president and CEO of the International Fellowship for Christians and Jews, the largest provider of humanitarian aid in Israel. In her role, Eckstein has the rare distinction of being a woman leading one of the world's largest religious not-for-profit organizations. Eckstein became the president and CEO of the fellowship in February of 2019, following the unexpected death of her legendary father, who I knew, Rabbi Yael Eckstein, who founded the fellowship in 1983. Yael is a hands-on executive, often found front and center of service by personally greeting Olim, that's new immigrants to Israel, sitting with elderly Holocaust survivors in their homes, or distributing food to those in need. With a special passion for basic security of Jews, under Eckstein's leadership, the fellowship has provided resources to secure synagogues around the world, has fortified Jewish communities on the border with Gaza, and has built and placed over 5,000 bomb shelters throughout Israel over the years. Please watch this short video. Welcome, Yael Eckstein.
Thank you so much, Roz. I'm so happy to be here with you this morning in California, this evening in Israel.
Good morning, good evening. Thank you for joining us. We want to hear all about the important work that you guys do and have done for decades now, and the legacy of your father. We're excited to hear all about it. So where do we begin? Can we begin with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your upbringing.
Sure. So I live here in Israel now, and I guess I would say that my life is everything I've never dreamed of. That I grew up in Chicago, studied in New York, never thought I would end up living in Israel, and thank God I've been here now for over 15 years and wouldn't change it for anything. I run now the organization that my father, Rabbi Yael Eckstein, started when my mom was pregnant with me, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, which also is something that I wasn't raised with. I wasn't expected to take over. It happened very organically. And when I came to Israel and saw what he was doing, I wanted to be part of it. I've been with Fellowship for 15 years. I am married +4, and just happy to be part of the world that's privileged on the side to be giving during these very difficult times, especially.
And your organization gives so much to the state of Israel and to the Jewish people. We're going to hear all about that in a few minutes. But first, let's hear a little bit about your incredible father, who I was fortunate, blessed to be able to meet several times and in different settings, because he was always there. He was always there for these important events, Jewish events throughout the world. And so tell us a little bit about him.
Well, my father was a man with a mission, that whatever he did, he put his heart into, which is why I think whenever he entered a room, he would just take over. As I'm sure you know, his energy was so strong because he believed in everything he did. And after he passed away at age 67, so suddenly I realized, okay, everything kind of makes sense. He had to fit so much to accomplish, so much to achieve in such a short lifetime. But he was a young rabbi with smicha from Rav Soloveitchik at Yeshiva University when he was working for the ADL and sent to Chicago to stop the KKK march, the Nazi march in Skokie. Many people will remember that in 1983, 1984. And it was then that he realized that the Jewish community is so small, that even the strongest Jewish community is so small in numbers, that he decided to reach out to the Christian community that was expressing their love for the Jewish people and their desire to really stand with the Jewish people in the struggles that were happening then, which was right when the Soviet Union fell and the Jewish people had to get out and go to Israel, the first opportunity in thousands of years. That's when he really started this mission of needing to connect the Jewish community with Christians who he foresaw as Israel's greatest friend and strategic partner.
So that's a good entree to telling us a little bit about the organization itself. Tell us about the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews that your father established so beautifully.
My father used to always say, it has such a bad name. It's so long. But I guess Stand With Us is almost as long. So, but it just describes what we do. Two great organizations with names that really reflect what it is. So the fellowship is the largest philanthropic organization in Israel. We raise around $130 million a year from mostly Christians, around 95% Christian donors. And unlike most Jewish organizations where we have a large percentage of the donors, major donors, the fellowship is based on the tithes of the simple people who want to do whatever they can to simply stand with Israel in their spiritual prayer and in action. And so our average gift is around $64 a month. And from around 1.4 million donors, the fellowship is able to have such a huge impact on helping the needy. We look at the Torah, at the Bible, for our direction of where we should be helping, because there are so many causes. There are so many really legitimate causes. There are so many needs on the ground. And so we open the Bible and see, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, shelter the poor. And those are the areas that we're most focused on.
I see that. I just want to take a momentary break and tell you that we've got love coming to us from Scotland and from Fiji and from Germany. I know all of you are coming to us from all over the world. There's thousands of you watching. We are very grateful you're taking the time today to learn a little bit more about this remarkable organization. As a daughter of Holocaust survivors, it always touched me to hear what it is that you're doing with Holocaust survivors. Can you tell us a little bit about that, both outside and inside of Israel?
Yeah, well, love to everybody from Jerusalem, and thank you for joining. Holocaust survivors, it's very interesting because as young Jewish girl in America, all of my friends' grandparents were Holocaust survivors. I don't remember any, hardly, grandparents that at least one of the grandparents didn't have a number on their arm. I myself, my grandfather is a Holocaust survivor from Germany, and I remember going to sleep with stories that my grandfather used to tell me of how he miraculously survived the war and how so much of his family was killed. But what I didn't realize was that not all Holocaust survivors are the ones who made it, like my grandfather and the others of my friends' grandparents, the ones who were privileged and strong enough, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, to relocate after the war and start life over. And what I've seen from living here in Israel and going many times a year to the former Soviet Union is that our grandparents are not the norm. The ones who moved to New York, who moved to Chicago, who were strong enough to establish new families and live very normative life, raising the next generation of Jewish leaders. So many Holocaust survivors fell into a state of depression, of really of fear of anyone knowing that they're Jewish, because it was that the fact that they were associated with a synagogue that the Nazis got the list and killed the whole community. That so many Holocaust survivors, the weakest, really, the orphans, people who their whole families were shot in front of their eyes. I remember meeting a woman named Olga in Ukraine this year, that she remembers her neighbor had 4 kids that she was very close with, and the Nazis came and closed the door to their house and burned it down, and she watched as all of her neighbors burned to death. That these are people who couldn't start over. They just weren't able to. And so they moved to these small villages in Ukraine or in Russia or across the former Soviet Union and have lived lives of planting their own vegetables to survive, cutting wood to survive, not being associated with any Jewish community, and really living on the little they had. But now they're 80, they're 90. They can no longer go out and grow their own vegetables. They can no longer chop wood for themselves. And that's why the fellowship is here, to really help the weakest of that generation that now has nobody to watch out for them. And the fellowship is there to tell them, until the end of your life, we will bring you food every single week. We will bring you heat every single winter. We will bring you volunteers that will be like your family. And the world has changed for the better. There are millions of Christians who stand with you, who love you, and who are actually taking care of you in your final years.
Incredible. People really don't realize this issue, that there are so many indigent Holocaust survivors throughout the world. And what a blessing that you're able to give them, that they don't need to worry about the food and the heat. Those are basic survival things that you're able to provide, thanks to the Christians who are so helpful and so loving to help with this mitzvah, which is a good deed. So I'm thanking all of you. Take a moment and really salute you and thank all of our Christian friends for being so incredible to the Jewish people wherever they are. Thank you. Thank you. So tell us also, please, a little bit about the Holocaust survivors in Israel. How do you work with them? How do you help them?
Well, in Israel, we have a program that also focuses on the basic needs of Holocaust survivors. Now, during Corona, for example, we're providing over 30,000 elderly, mostly Holocaust survivors, with food every single week, because so many of the elderly are scared to leave their homes to go shopping. And we've found, by working with the Ministry of Welfare, with the social workers on the ground, we've created criteria to identify the elderly in Israel who are in most need to receive this food aid. And we've connected them with volunteers and with food packages to make sure that at least they'll have food, at least they'll have comfort. And what's amazing is that I hear so often that just as important as the food is when it comes and they're able to fill their empty refrigerators and they're terrified to go out, and we're working with elderly who are living on under $500 a month, who don't have family, who are over 80 years old, that just as much as the food is a lifesaver for them, a simple phone call from our volunteers in Israel serve almost the same purpose of really giving them hope and the strength to continue on.
You know, everybody out there should be very mindful of the fact that elderly alone right now are suffering from depression. This COVID has really isolated
Yeah.
everybody to a great extent. So if you can make that call, if you can reach out to friends, it's a very important time to do that. And so we're so grateful for the work you're doing, Yael. Tell us a little bit about how you continue to build these relationships with Christians, because it's so important for the work that you want to do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I always say my father planted very strong roots, and now I look at it as my opportunity, my blessing, my obligation, my privilege to water that tree and see it grow. And so, thank God, right now the fellowship is almost 30% ahead of our projected budget for this year. And even with COVID, we are on the ground distributing all different types of aid that, as so many organizations are falling overnight because of the financial crisis, coupled with the fact that there are so many more urgent requests for help, the fellowship is very, very blessed to be in a position that we're able to distribute even more aid. We opened a $20 million emergency COVID fund where we have different programs for the new poor, the family's basic needs like electricity, like paying one-time rent, like buying a family food. We have a program with the Ministry of Welfare in Israel where they're using our platform to distribute their emergency COVID aid, because we have such an effective platform in distributing aid according to criteria immediately. We have programs for elderly. We have programs for lone soldiers that are newly released. And so I really look at it through two different eyes. On one end, which is the Israel end, I believe that nonprofits should work like a business, that nonprofits should not look at it as, oh, we're doing good, we're getting people help, Dayenu, that's enough. No, no, no. You have to function like a business. You have to make sure every single penny is going where it could be most effectively used, which is the aid. You have to have very clear goals, very clear criteria for how you distribute the aid. You have to have very clear KPIs, key performance indicators for where you want to go as far as organizationally, because just getting aid to people isn't enough. You have to make sure that you're doing it in the most strategic, most effective way. And then on the other end, my father used to always say that I caught the vision, that for me, this isn't just a job. People getting aid that are desperately in need is only one part of the coin. The other half of the coin is really engaging the Christian community to stand with Israel, to show them how much we appreciate them, and to really give them the tools that they're able to stand with Israel and the Jewish people, that this love, that this wellspring of support, not only through the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews and the $130 million that we raise every year in humanitarian support, but you see also politically, just as Stand With Us is working so hard to turn around all the BDS lies and make sure that Israel continues to have political friends and be educated on the reality of Israel. But we see the American embassy move to Jerusalem. Why? Not because of the pressure of the Jewish community, but because of the Christian community. Israel has around 4.2 million tourists come to Israel every year, which really is one of the main sources of income for Israel's economy. Over half of those are Christian. You see investors in the business world, Christian Zionists. I mean, the numbers, when you go through it, 90% of South America identify as Christian, 100 million Christians in China, 60 million Christians in Korea. It's just so much potential there that I look at it as really being in the hands of the Jewish community. We could look at them as strategic partners and invest in this relationship because it's not a given that it's going to continue, or we could neglect it and think that it's a given or think that it will continue. And unfortunately, then I think that we'll see the numbers dropping.
It's incredible what your father and what you have done to continue this legacy and to honor your father's memory. It is incredible, really incredible. Quick question. Let's ask the question that some people may already know, but why? Why do you think it's so important for Christians to support Israel and to support the Jewish people? Why do you think that is?
Well, I'll start with maybe debunking one of the first questions or myths that have historically been very prevalent in the Jewish community, and I think that now it's less or so, just because time does its time is the best way of proving someone's intentions or not. So the first question people always ask me is, don't they just want to convert us? And I always say, well, if the Christians wanted to convert the Jews, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews that had an Orthodox rabbi stand in the middle and me, an Orthodox Jewish woman in the middle, wouldn't be the largest provider of aid on behalf of the Christian community. It would be more organizations that do evangelizing or outwardly trying to convert. I think the fact that the fellowship is so straightforward that we do not do conversion. Actually, our donors don't have anything to do with the recipients. We stand in the middle in Israel to make sure that there is no crossing of that red line of evangelizing or trying to convert or spread any sort of gospel to the Jewish people. And so so the fact that we are the largest philanthropic organization shows that that isn't the intention. That isn't the main motivation. So then I guess you could get to the second question of, well, then why do they love the Jewish people? And that, I think, comes down to three main reasons. Number one is any Christian who supports, loves, prays for Israel will quote you Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless Israel and curse those who curse Israel. And they say, I want to be on the side of blessing. This isn't something that's of man. This is something of God. God made a promise. And when God makes a promise, he keeps it forever. God promised that if you bless the Jewish people for whatever reason that we can't understand, you will be blessed. And so Genesis 12:3 is a real motivating factor for so many Christians who love Israel. The second reason is, for the first time in thousands of years, we're living in a reality where the words of the prophets are coming to life, where Jews from all four corners of the earth, for the first time since the Second Temple was destroyed, are finally coming back to Israel. That for thousands of years we've been in exile, we've been wandering, we've been strangers in a strange land, praying, hoping, believing that we would be reunited with our biblical homeland. The world thought it was crazy. People of faith thought it was crazy, but still people of faith believed it would happen because God said it would happen. That we're living in a prophetic reality right now. And I think the Christian community really looks at it as their privilege and honor to be part of this with the Jewish people by helping them to get home to Israel. And the third reason is in the Christian Bible, in the New Testament, it says in Romans that Christians are grafted onto the rich olive tree of Israel. And more than the roots need the branches need the roots. And so I really think there's an amazing movement happening now of Christians going back to rediscover their biblical roots. What are those biblical roots? The olive tree of Israel. And so I see so many Christian churches now celebrating the feasts, the biblical feasts, and turning away against Christian traditions that are based in avodah zarah and idol worshiping. That there's a movement within the Christian community to return to their roots. That what was Jesus preaching? He was preaching based on the Torah that the Jewish people have been studying and keeping for thousands of years and have really protected and continued those traditions. So all of that together, I think, leads the way to this amazing wellspring of support for Israel from the Christian community.
That was a very full answer, and I'm sure that everybody learned a lot from that big answer. Thank you. So the Israelis, do they know that Christians are supporting them like this? And in your experience, what do they think? How do they feel about it?
That's a really interesting question. If you thought my last answer was long, you just wait. Just kidding. I feel like my father was the one who really took most of the heat because it was so new when he started it, that whenever he would say, this is Christian support for Israel, it was such a radical concept. It was so new. The only thing that the Jewish people knew about Christians was what they learned in the history books. And so when you say this is love and support from Christians, they'd be like, okay, do they want to kill us? Do they want to convert us? What do they want from us? And my father would try to explain, no, this is just their prayer in action. This is a gift of love that they don't want anything in return. And it was very hard to believe that after so many generations of persecution in the name of Christianity. And so I think American Jews actually have a different issue even, that as far as American politics, the Jewish community and Christian community are historically on very different, take very different positions on political topics in America. But the fellowship, that's exactly what we do. What we say is we don't get involved in politics. We don't even say which candidate's better for Israel. We don't say who to vote for. We don't get involved in annexation or Judea and Samaria. We get involved in we have one issue, and that is Israel, standing with Israel, loving Israel, learning about Israel, and all of the politics we don't touch, which is why I think we've been so successful also. But after 30 years of the Jewish community seeing the fellowship does not do any sort of conversion, we don't have any sort of ulterior motive, and seeing the Christian investment in Israel be so prominent in so many other areas, even outside of the fellowship, I think the Jewish community have really gotten used to this idea that Christians are Israel's best friend, that actually now I have to work from the other side. While my father was trying to convince the Jewish community, no, they're our friends, they're our friends. I have to convince the Jewish community, no, it's not a given. If we don't invest in this, it is going to end. It's not a given, because for so many Jews now, being an evangelical Christian is synonymous with being pro-Israel.
So we want to hear a little bit about that. How are you investing in the next generation of Christians? But before you tell us about that, I just want to say we have a lot in common, and that Stand With Us does not get political either.
Right.
We are only invested in supporting Israel and making sure that people are inspired about Israel, and also in fighting anti-Semitism. So we just stick to our mission. And I think the organizations that do that stick to their mission as opposed to getting political, are really the most successful and the most welcoming. So tell us a little bit about how you are reaching young Christians to make sure that this legacy continues.
Well, I agree with what you said, Roz, 100%. And Stand With Us, I think, is an anomaly and is something to be celebrated for anyone who loves Israel. I mean, Stand With Us has reached all areas of life in order to educate and engage people with Israel. And I personally follow Stand With Us and love the information that I learned. So keep up the amazing work with that. Definitely, I look at one of my focuses is engaging the next generation with Israel, of the Christian community. I was on the 700 Club with Gordon Robertson. That's Pat Robertson's son, who's a good friend and one of the most amazing people, and friends of Israel. And again, there's a generational pass down of love for Israel from Pat Robertson to Gordon Robertson. And when I was sitting with Gordon, they have one of the largest Christian colleges in America. There are over 500 Christian colleges in America. And I said to Gordon, "Oh, what's your Israel program on the campus?" He said, "Yael, I wish it was stronger. I wish we had more. I wish we had a curriculum. I wish we had so much more that had to do with Israel, but we just don't have access to it." And that's when I realized that the low-hanging fruit is reaching out to, in reaching the next generation, is having a Christian Israel education program and engagement program on these 500 plus Christian seminaries across America. And so we tested it out. We have one amazing man, Roger Cheeks, who leads our outreach program for the next generation of Christians in these seminaries and colleges. And we created a curriculum with Orthodox rabbi here in Israel that was geared towards Christians from a Jewish perspective, of really connecting the biblical Israel to modern Israel. It goes through all the, where's that connection? That's where we lose the next generation, where it's, okay, biblical Israel is fine, but modern Israel, now that's a different story. And so we really go through history connecting that and educating them. And we're already on over with just one employee, and in less than a year, we're already on 15 college campuses where we have student leaders, we have the curriculum in all the different departments, we have online courses, and we're focused really on the grassroots. Unlike some organizations that are amazing, but they're focused on the most elite, the leaders of the community, we're focused on really building grassroots support on all of these campuses for Israel. So in this pilot program, we've seen great success, and actually we've seen the Jewish community get involved with the fellowship's work in this specific area and fighting anti-Semitism, of making sure that BDS doesn't get onto these campuses, because as we say every Friday night in our prayers, our Shabbat prayers, Sof ma'aseh machshavat tchila, the end result is a product of the first thought. That I believe if we could get into these Christian seminaries across America with pro-Israel education, BDS will not have a chance to flourish there.
I just want to jump on this issue for a moment before we take some questions from our audience. Let's talk a little bit about anti-Semitism, rising anti-Semitism. One of the big concerns of Stand With Us, and something that we work on all the time, 24/6. But before we do, I just want to offer you this offer that if there's anything that Stand With Us can do for you on the college campus, let us know, because that is an area that, since 2002, we have built quite a team that's international now, working on college campuses. So we would love to assist in any possible way. Let us know how we can help. So what are your thoughts about rising anti-Semitism, BDS, etc.?
I think that there are two different sides to it. And I think that the rise in anti-Semitism is terrifying. It's something we have to, as the Jewish community, come together to find tangible ways to fight. The fellowship doesn't have any events. We don't have forums. We don't have rallies. I mean, I think that we need to, as a Jewish community, find tangible ways to fight the rise in anti-Semitism. And we're very good at sitting around round tables. We're very good at having lots of meetings, but we have to find tangible ways that we could really stop this. The fellowship's focus is one tangible way. There are many different areas and ways that we can stop the rise in anti-Semitism, or do whatever we can, which is the focus on engaging the Christian community to stand with us in our fight against anti-Semitism. And I can tell you they have a very, very loud voice and a lot of influence all over the world. But coupled with that, and sometimes I look at the numbers and it's terrifying. It's terrifying to see how, in some European countries, there are more anti-Semitic attacks and incidents than any time since World War II ended, that there's some propaganda going around that is reminiscent of Germany 1930s, that it's terrifying what's happening, and just what people accept as fact that they don't know. I think that's the most terrifying. I think on one end, there are really evil people who are trying to intentionally spread anti-Semitism, but I think the most terrifying thing is just the platforms that enable the ignorant and people that don't necessarily know so much on Israel to be totally affected, and their minds to be taken over by these lies and conspiracies against Israel. But coupled with that sounds very Yeush, with a lot of despair. I think it's also important to keep in perspective that we are experiencing, in many ways, one of the most amazing golden ages for the Jewish people, maybe ever, that we have the state of Israel with an army, with a government who has one goal: to protect the Jewish people. Tomorrow, I'm welcoming home a flight of New Olim from France with the Minister of Aliyah and Klita. And I mean, when have we had a state that when anti-Semitism rises across the world, which it always does eventually, that we could actually have a safe place with a country whose only goal is to protect us? And so I always keep that in mind as well, that within all the despair and terrifying numbers, we have a country that for the first time is dedicated simply to protecting us. And, what I experience every day is that we have millions of Christian friends, of non-Jewish friends who would do anything to stand with us, to protect us and raise their voice against that anti-Semitism that once again is on the rise.
So I want to respond to something that you said about tangible ways. I don't know if you know this, but because we're new friends, but I'm glad you follow Stand With Us so closely. It's good. But tangible ways to fight anti-Semitism, we actually now have 170 pro bono attorneys
Wow.
across the United States, and we're partnering with other countries to help fight anti-Semitism. We are very aggressively going after this in a legal, tangible, legal way. And we now have the Center for Combating Anti-Semitism, which is a brand new division of Stand With Us. Carly Gamble is our director of that division, and we're very proud of her, very proud of our legal team, Yael Mazar and Jonathan Bell, and giving you a shout out because we love you so much, and your tangible ways to fight anti-Semitism. So everybody should know this. We're very serious about this. Back to questions now. I'd like to be able to take some from the audience. So let me give you a couple. So Hannah from Seattle is asking you, as a Jewish student on campus, what is the best way to promote an interfaith community?
Hi, Hannah, in Seattle. Thank you for your question. I really believe in the power of the individual and in the power of authenticity. What I see is when I am so rooted in what I'm doing and really believing in what I'm doing and thinking about what I'm doing, suddenly you would think, according to logic, that I would be close to other people. But I always say, that you've reached truth when you've reached paradox. Suddenly I'm more open to hearing about other faiths and other traditions and other ideas because I don't feel threatened by them. That I would say just to invite and include others in different traditions, different passions that you have that are connected to Israel, that are connected to faith, and simply to be open and yet to be very much rooted in what you believe in and where you are.
Thank you. Thank you. From Josh in Panama City, what has been the most eye-opening experience while working at the fellowship? The most eye-opening?
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's a really full loaded, amazing question. There are two areas that stand out for me. One is going in the Hamas and Hezbollah terror tunnels. The fellowship has sponsored over 5,500 bomb shelters on the northern and southern borders of Israel. And so we are always kept in the loop of the latest threats and actually are on the ground during war, during rocket attacks with the different Ministry of Defense and Pikuda Orif Home Front Command. So I think one of the most eye-opening experiences was really walking in those tunnels and seeing how advanced they are, how they were almost completed, how they opened up into Israel, and just seeing how, although, thank God, I feel so safe in Israel and I'm raising my children and really believe, Hinei lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. It is miracles that are keeping us here. It is those watchmen on the walls. And that's on the Israel side. But on the other side, on the side of meeting with Christians, I am always inspired. And one thing just stands out a lot to me, but I have a million stories for this one. It was during the Gaza war, 2016, I believe. I was traveling around America trying to raise money for the bomb shelters that we were building. And I met with a woman in Texas, and I was telling her about the different programs that the fellowship had going on to keep the people of Israel safe. And she said, "How much does a bomb shelter cost?" I said, "Well, it costs $13,000 to build a mobile bomb shelter." And she looked up to the heavens and she got tears in her eyes. And she said, "Yael, this is a sign from God." I said, "What?" She said, "I've been saving for 8 years to renovate my kitchen. I have exactly $13,000 saved. And she wrote me a check right there to build a bomb shelter for the people of Israel
Wow.
instead of renovating her kitchen.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a story. That is an incredible story to remember. And hopefully she's well and can hear you right now.
Yes.
Tell the story because it is so moving. I got chills. Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, Yael, unfortunately, our time is up. I do want to congratulate you on your new book, though, From Generation to Generation. And wish you hatzlacha with that new book. And maybe we can come back together and talk just about that. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to more questions. So everybody, thank you again for joining us today on Stand With Us Connect, and we will see you next time.